There are so many go-getting girl reporters in this stuff that it's hard to keep them straight. Assigned to the curious matter of the dying brides in The Corpse Vanishes, episode 105, we've got Patricia Hunter, who's investigating a string of incidents of hopeful young ladies in love, all of whom perish of a faint at the altar. Turns out the mystery's not so mysterious. Each incident has in common an orchid pinned on the victim's brooch, one so toxic Patricia sinks momentarily into death's dry grip on simply sniffing the hybridized flora. Maybe it's a clue, her photographer sidekick suggests, in case we've missed it. These hints at the movie's secret are so plainly laid you could be forgiven for wondering if they're meant as bait. Thus, in brooding on them, Patricia has little trouble deducing Professor Lorenz as the prime suspect. Actually conveying herself to Lorenz's princely abode in nearby Brookdale to test her theory proves a bit more trouble. Once arrived at the Brookdale train station, she solicits a ride, but no one will take her. Not the only cab in town, and not Lorenz's underlings, who happen to be leaving just as she shows up. No matter. She deftly steals onto the back of the truck they're using to convey coffins to the estate. Why is anyone pretending there's a mystery here? And so gets halfway there before Lorenz's ghoulish subservience discover her, and she winds up stranded alone on a country road at night. Luckily, a friend of Lorenz's happens on her adrift and drives her the rest of the way to the estate, where she survives at the least, though she spends a terrifying night. This journey is Patricia's second intimacy with death, and it's far more curious than the moment of halting mortal panic with the orchid. Indeed, the panic is what stirs the curiosity. Is she drawn to the back of that truck by something more than a need to solve the case? The lure of solving the mystery of the beyond itself? If not, what else could she possibly hope to get by hurling herself into a milieu so suffused with symbols of death? And if so, she gets her wish. Over the journey that began with her rocking aside the coffins in the rumbling truck, Patricia passes from a real realm to an imaginary one, one where instead of researching the enigma, she becomes immersed in it. Most Gothic and many other kinds of horror have moments of this kind where the hero, or heroine in this case, crosses over from a quotidian to a more spectral or horrific place. The movie's title is a clear, if macabre, piggyback on The Lady Vanishes, 1938, and like Lady and other contemporary movies, Corpse is aimed, at least in part, at a female demographic. This would be the market for novels like Rebecca and Isaac Denison's 1934 Seven Gothic Tales. Hence the name, the Lugosi pedigree, and the ghostly mood the movie lays with some effort over its rustic, generically American day-for-night shots. Patricia's sisters in these other women's pictures, in their own way, share her connection with the vagaries of the Stygian realm. Iris of The Lady Vanishes gets a bonk on the head and spends half the movie in a fog, fainting more often than the brides that baffle Patricia so. She spends the other half of the movie imagining herself in the place of a missing woman who may be a flight of fancy or may be dead. The unnamed heroine of Hitchcock's 1940 follow-up, Rebecca, actually inhabits the place of the dead. Once married into Manderley, she takes the name of her husband's deceased first wife and symbolically dooms herself when one of the waitstaff calls on an intercom phone and asks for her.
Mrs. De Winter? Oh, I'm afraid you've made a mistake. Mrs. De Winter's been dead for over a year,
she says querulously. At once she realizes her mistake and lunges for the handset, but the deed is already done. It would be a mistake, though, to confuse these three women's proximity to death with that of the cliched damsel in distress. Iris, Mrs. De Winter, and Patricia are no Anderos lashed to sacrificial altars, gawking helplessly at the gigantic gorilla about to seal their fates. Like Dr. Mallory in The Phantom Creeps, Patricia finds the eternal because she's looking for it. When she and her photographer first learn about the epidemic of dying brides and rejoice with bleached smiles that they finally have a scoop, this could be mistaken for irreverence. It is instead familiarity. Patricia doesn't disrespect death. On the contrary, it and she are long-lost friends, reunited. We recall Ross Allen's bestial communion in Catching Trouble, and his more photogenic cousin Johnny Weissmuller is still doing callbacks as Tarzan the Ape Man. Not all tales about the link between human and beast are so self-consciously serene and virile, however. A quarter century ago, Franz Kafka wrote in a short story, Report to an Academy, of Red Peter, an ape taken captive who learns to mimic human speech. Peter's neither human nor primate, but some changeable combination of the two. So too are his captives, even though, at least on paper, they're fully human. Their brutality certainly far exceeds gentle Peter's. The desperate condition of his captivity corners him into learning to mimic human speech and behavior to free himself. Maybe the caged wolf in this year's The Mad Monster, episode 103, subject in Mad Dr. Cameron's quest to fuse the spirit of man and canine, also finds some freedom in inhabiting his human counterpart. This is Petro, Cameron's handicapped stooge, and the part of him the wolf must relish most is the part that can range free, hunt, mimic consciousness, if not be fully human. Petro, in turn, gets to transcend his mental disability, that which holds him back from fully rational language-based cogitation, in that part of evil Dr. Cameron's scientific genius that channels through him. Meanwhile, Cameron, constrained in this cerebrum, uses Petro to indulge his bestial side. None of these figures are fully human, none fully animal. All are lost in the interrelationship among the three of them. Perfect immersion in language and the rational mind eludes them. But all attempts to surrender entirely to bestiality and instinct fail as well. From his castle outside Ashton, Cameron finds a way to transfuse animal and human blood because he's revolutionized his way of scientific thinking relative to his more conventionally minded colleagues. At the moment, Freud is the last word on matters of the human mind, and so Cameron's peers presumably investigate the psyche via symbolic and subjective speculation. Cameron, instead, thinks humans are essentially no different from any other mammal and have no claim to manifest superiority due to their unique language-based syntactical stream of consciousness, that which, Freud alleges, separates humans from the lower animals. Cameron's view of the human entity, of the biological entity generally, is strictly mechanistic and leaves no room for the impractical and indecisive meanderings of Freud. This is why he meets with more success than his conventional-minded colleagues. It's easier to solve an equation than it is to interpret a dream. Once he's managed to control his test subjects' transformations to and from wolf and human, the moon has nothing to do with this particular tale of lycanthropy, Cameron molds Petro into a powerful but malleable strong-arm. With this ace in the hole, he convenes the fellowship of doctors who doubted him and then makes his exit, having secretly arranged for Petro to transform in his absence. The rabid wolf creature rips their life from them as a demonstration of Dr. Cameron's scientific triumph. Inevitably, though, the wolf turns. Cameron would have a better sense of the risks if he paid more attention in those Intro to Freud classes. Petro's psyche, though simple, is still complex enough to elude Cameron's theoretical framework. When the Wolfman, untransformed but made more bestial nonetheless by the mad doctor's reckless procedures, complains of bloody-minded dreams and directs a poorly managed, unfamiliar sexual energy at the doctor's daughter, one that Petro can scarcely understand, let alone control, Cameron has little expertise to fall back on. Libido and symbolic expressions of the death drive aren't really his area. So he resorts to operant conditioning, that is, whipping Petro until he cuts it out. When the small old man's strategy of repeatedly beating a preternatural man-beast gets him killed in the flaming wreckage of his burning estate, it comes as something less than a total surprise. And why not simply shoot or poison his med school rivals? Why go to all the trouble and risk of using the creature when its behavior is so volatile? It's because their mere death is not the apotheosis of vengeance Cameron requires His revenge rituals are too elaborate. Confronted with the monster at the exact same instant that it falls on them, the scientist's last thought must be equal horror and capitulation, a bitter acknowledgement that Cameron was right all along, and likewise his nihilistic worldview. The only flaw in his plan is that he always arranges to be elsewhere when the killing blow comes, but it's not really a flaw at all. Presumably he does this to give himself an alibi, but it's actually so the rivals aren't distracted by his physical form from the embodiment of his scientific victory.
Silence! I'm not interested in your imbecilic mouthings. All of you demonstrated your lack of vision by demanding my resignation from the faculty. Well, you accomplished your purpose. You cast me out. You robbed me of everything that I held most dear in life. Position, honor, respect. You branded me as a madman, held me up to ridicule before the whole world. But now it's time for my revenge. Pedro will see to that. Now you shall pay for your folly. There's no escape for any of you. You shall die one by one at the hands of the scientific marvel that you scoffed at.
One of the more pedestrian moral intrigues the mad monster leaves as an exercise for the audience is whether human or beast is more humane. Cameron, representing Homo sapiens, doesn't make much of a case for us. He's ruthless, calculating, violent. Though actor Glenn Strange lacks Lon Chaney's performative dimension in Of Mice and Men's, or Karloff's in Frankenstein, meanwhile, we're plainly meant to take Petro, at least pre-transformation Petro, as soft-hearted, childlike, and innocent. It's an old theme, this conflation of beast and human, civilized and primitive. The established stories that have taken on this theme, however, have done it at some level of remove. Yes, Frankenstein's monster is, like Petro, on the one hand naive and good-hearted, on the other jealous, impulsive, and volatile. Yes, Doctors Cameron and Jekyll share a brilliant rationality, characteristic of humanity at its most ascendant. Petro and Mr. Hyde, an animalistic thirst for murder that's nearly impossible to slake. Perhaps even more than its A-list predecessors, though. The mad monster muddies the line between man and animal until it's nearly indistinguishable, until the process of transitioning between human and beast is the only tangible reality, the only point of reference. Thus, both Cameron and Petro drift unmoored among separate but parallel mental states. One moment Cameron is perfectly lucid, the next he's holding imaginary council around his laboratory table with ghostly double-exposed apparitions of the med school colleagues who spurned him. He makes as though dressing them down with eloquent extemporaneous oratory, but in reality he's simply mumbling to himself. He might not have any theoretical framework for grasping Petro's feverish animalistic dreams, but that doesn't stop him from having such dreams of his own. Petro, meanwhile, has lucid moments when he verges on savantism.
Gee, it must be great to be educated. I wish I had a lot of book learning so I could understand what this is all about.
Lenora and Tom, that rare specimen, the male go-getting reporter, both nearly as close to Cameron's machinations as Petro is, and both ostensibly far saner than he is, seem nevertheless further from comprehending the plot the Doctor is unfolding. Maybe this is because their affection for and closeness to him create a veil of denial. Maybe because Petro's simplicity prevents him from rationalizing away the evidence of Cameron's hidden nefariousness. Does Petro's intuition make him more human or less? Does his purity of perception constitute a rationality evolved even beyond Cameron's scientific acumen? Or is it animalistic, akin to the keen sense of a wolf whose snout is lowered to the ground?
did I get pictures? I covered everything except a close-up of this pretty posy.
Why, that looks like the one the bride wore. What are you doing with it?
Presenting it to you, sweetheart, as a token of my devotion. Take a smell.
Who ever heard of an orchid with a scent?
Well, that one has. Maybe it's a clue.
What a peculiar sweet odor.
Yeah, make a swell romaine salad. Hey, Pat, you're not going to pass out too, are you?
No, I'm okay.